My fiancée said she wanted to explore her feelings for her male best friend a few weeks before our wedding. So I let her explore while I canceled the deposits, packed her stuff, and cut her out of my life. All right, Reddit. It's wild how fast things can flip. One minute you're arguing about whether to have the reception at a waterfront venue or a historic mansion. The next you're boxing up someone's belongings and changing the locks. Grab your popcorn. This is going to be intense. I'm Hunter, 32 male, territory manager for an industrial equipment distributor covering the Southeast. Been engaged to this girl for 8 months. I'm going to call her Dora because apparently she likes to explore. Together for 3.5 years. Everything felt locked in. We had this gorgeous Victorian I'd inherited from my grandmother 3 years ago. Wedding planned for mid-April, which was now less than 3 months away. The whole future mapped out like a GPS route with no traffic. She's an event coordinator for one of those upscale venues downtown. Charming. And up until last Saturday, I thought I'd somehow won the relationship game on my first serious attempt. We met through my buddy Nate, who I've known since we were both getting our teeth knocked loose playing lacrosse in high school. Nate's one of those guys who knows everybody in a 3-county radius and somehow ends up invited to every social event that happens in the Low Country. He's also the kind of friend who will help you move a body at 3 a.m. and then roast you mercilessly at brunch the next morning for getting blood on his truck seats. He'd been trying to set me up with someone for months after my last relationship ended, and Dora was his co-worker's roommate's friend. My first impression of Dora was strong. She walked into this riverfront bar wearing this sundress that made every guy in the place forget what they were saying mid-sentence. Confident, funny. Had opinions about everything from local politics to whether Savannah's squares were overrated. I disagreed with about half of what she said, which somehow made the conversation more interesting. We ended up closing down the bar talking about nothing important and everything at once. By the third date, I was hooked. By the 6th month, she was basically living at my place. By year 3, I proposed. Some warning signs were there. I just wrote them off. Dora had grown up as the pretty one, learned early that charm could get her what effort got other people. When she wanted something, she found ways to frame it as reasonable. When things didn't go her way, something had gone wrong with the universe. I found it charming at the time. Thought confidence meant she had her head on straight. Turns out those are two different things. The house was the real anchor of everything. My grandmother left it to me when she passed. 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, sitting on a corner lot in one of those neighborhoods where the Spanish moss hangs so thick it feels like you're living inside a postcard. I'd spent the better part of 18 months restoring it. New electrical, updated plumbing, kept all the original character while making it actually livable. Dora moved in about a year after we started dating, and I watched her slowly take over every room with throw pillows and decorative objects I didn't understand the purpose of. I didn't mind. Seemed like a fair trade for having someone to come home to. Her family embraced me pretty quick. Her mom, Zoe, would text me recipes and ask my opinion on things before consulting Dora. Her dad, Arthur, started calling me son and talking about how he'd always wanted someone to take fishing who actually knew what they were doing. He'd even bought a new tackle box in anticipation of our future trips. The only friction was Dora's older sister, Vivian. She was 2 years older, perpetually single, and had this way of looking at me like I was a stain on an expensive rug. She worked in real estate, drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salary, and resented that I'd inherited a historic home instead of grinding for it like she did. I think it violated her worldview about how success was supposed to work. She'd make these little comments at family dinners. How lucky I was. How some people have to actually work for things. How Dora was settling by not dating someone more ambitious. The comments always came wrapped in a smile, delivered in a tone that could be interpreted as joking if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention. Once at Thanksgiving, she'd asked loudly across the table how my career prospects were looking, then pivoted immediately into talking about a deal she'd just closed before I could respond. Her mom had changed the subject, but the damage was done. I ignored most of it because Dora would always roll her eyes after and tell me Vivian was just jealous. Jealous of what exactly was never clear, was. But it seemed to satisfy Dora, so I let it go. Then there was Tristan, Dora's best friend since college. They'd met freshman year in some communications class and had been inseparable ever since. Tristan worked in digital marketing, which as far as I could tell meant he made Instagram posts for local businesses and called himself a brand strategist. He was one of those guys who wore designer sneakers with every outfit and had this carefully cultivated stubble that probably took him 20 minutes to maintain every morning. Every story he told somehow circled back to how many followers he had or which influencer had reposted his content. The first time I met him, He looked me up and down and said something about how Dora usually dated guys with more creative energy. I told him I had plenty of creative energy. I just didn't feel the need to post about it for validation. He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. We'd been cordially hostile ever since. What sealed my opinion of him was a party about a year into my relationship with Dora. I came back from getting drinks and found him with his hand on her lower back, whispering something in her ear. She laughed and didn't move away. When she saw me, she stepped back like nothing happened. Tristan just smiled. I should have noticed earlier how much time they spent together. Coffees before work, lunch meetings to discuss marketing opportunities for the venue, late-night phone calls about his latest dating disaster, or her stress about wedding planning. I trusted Dora completely. Tristan was her friend. I had female friends. Grown adults can have platonic relationships with the opposite gender. That's what I told myself every time I noticed him looking at her a little too long, or touching her arm a little too casually. I was being paranoid, insecure, jealous over nothing. I was wrong on all counts. Now let me tell you about my other close friend besides Nate, Roscoe. We'd worked together at my first job out of college, and he was genuinely the funniest human being I'd ever met. Naturally hilarious in that deadpan Southern style where you can't tell if he's joking until 3 sentences later. He looked like a middle-aged accountant but talked like a stand-up comedian doing a set about the mundane horrors of suburban life. His divorce had taught him to find humor in catastrophe, and he applied that philosophy to basically everything. He had been through a split about 5 years back and had developed this cynical but accurate radar for relationship red flags. His ex-wife had left him for her yoga instructor. He'd been quietly skeptical about Dora from the start, but never pushed it, because he could tell I was happy. The night before everything fell apart, we'd been sitting out on my porch, and he'd made some comment about how Tristan gave off the energy of a golden retriever who'd learned to use LinkedIn. I laughed it off. Shouldn't have. Saturday morning started normal. I'd been up early working on some quarterly projections for work, coffee getting cold beside my laptop. Dora came downstairs around 10 with this expression, like she was about to deliver bad news, but was annoyed about having to do it. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned most of our wedding, and said we needed to talk. My first thought was wedding stress. The guest list had gotten out of control. Her mom kept trying to add distant relatives. The caterer had raised their prices. Normal pre-wedding chaos. I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention, expecting to talk about seating arrangements or whatever crisis had emerged overnight. Instead, she told me she thought we needed to take a break. Not a break from wedding planning. A break from us. She'd been doing a lot of thinking, and before we got married, she needed to explore something, figure out some feelings she'd been having, get clarity on what she really wanted before making a forever commitment. I asked her what she needed to explore. That's when she mentioned Tristan, the guy who'd been orbiting her like a desperate moon for the better part of a decade. He'd finally told her how he felt, and apparently she had feelings too. Had been having them for a while, actually. She just needed a month or two to see if there was really something there, or if it was just the stress of wedding planning making her confused. I sat there processing this information. She wanted me to wait while she test drove a relationship with Tristan. I asked her to clarify. She wanted a break from our engagement so she could pursue something with Tristan and then decide if she wanted to come back to me. She nodded like this was the most reasonable request in the world. I mean, this is actually the mature way to handle it, she said, using that tone she always used when she was about to explain why her way was the only logical option. I could just wonder forever, or worse, I could go behind your back. At least I'm telling you. Tristan and I have this connection that I need to figure out before I walk down the aisle. Don't you want me to know for sure, instead of spending our whole marriage asking myself what if? The audacity was almost impressive. She'd somehow convinced herself that asking for permission to cheat was morally superior to just being faithful. I asked her how long she had been thinking about this. She admitted it had been building for months. He understood her creative side. He supported her dreams. He made her feel seen. I reminded her that I'd literally rebuilt a historic Victorian to be her dream home, that I'd funded most of the wedding, that I'd rearranged my entire work schedule to be present for every vendor meeting and venue tour and cake tasting she'd wanted me at. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable. That's practical stuff. Tristan's there for me emotionally. It's not the same thing. That's when I understood what was happening. This wasn't about clarity or honesty or making sure before committing. This was about having a safety net while she explored something shiny. I was supposed to sit here in the house I owned, maintaining the life we'd built, waiting for her to decide if Tristan was an upgrade or a downgrade. And if Tristan didn't work out, she could come back to the reliable option who had a stable income and a beautiful home. I told her no. She looked genuinely shocked. No breaks, I said. We're either getting married or we're not. If you want to explore your feelings for Tristan, go ahead. But we're done. Pack your things and be out by the end of the week. The shock shifted to anger faster than I expected. She told me I was being unreasonable, controlling. This was exactly why she needed space. I couldn't handle honest communication about her needs. I was making this all about my ego instead of caring about her emotional well-being. I walked out of the kitchen and went upstairs to my home office. Left her sitting there sputtering about how unfair I was being. I had work to do anyway. Those quarterly projections weren't going to finish themselves. She followed me upstairs about an hour later, still crying, asking what she was supposed to do now. I told her that wasn't my problem to solve. She put the engagement ring on my desk without a word and went to pack a bag. The ring sat there for 3 days before I put it in a drawer. I sold it 2 weeks later to a jeweler downtown. Got about 60% of what I paid. Still felt like a profit. Dora didn't take my ultimatum seriously at first. She assumed I was having a dramatic reaction and would calm down in a few days. She went to stay at Vivian's place Saturday night, probably expecting me to call and apologize by Sunday morning. I didn't call. Instead, I texted Nate and Roscoe and asked if they were free to help with a project. Sunday afternoon, we started boxing up Dora's belongings. Everything she'd brought into the house. Every throw pillow, decorative mirror, scented candle, and article of clothing. Nate showed up with his truck and a supply of moving boxes. Roscoe showed up with pizza and a running commentary on the aesthetic choices Dora had made. Seriously, who needs this many decorative plates? He said, wrapping a set of ceramic dishes that had been displayed on my dining room wall. You can't even eat off these. They're just plates that failed at being plates. He found a box of cards Tristan had sent Dora over the years. Birthday cards, congratulations cards, thinking of you cards, all signed with little hearts. Roscoe held one up, read it silently, and just said, "Yikes." Then into the box it went. Nate was more practical about the whole thing. He worked through each room, boxing up items and labeling them clearly. The efficiency was almost therapeutic. Dora's first real reaction came Monday morning, when I had her stuff professionally moved to a storage unit across town. She showed up at the house around noon, expecting to find everything as she'd left it. Instead, she found an empty closet, cleared bathroom shelves, and a note on the kitchen counter with the storage unit address and access code. My locksmith had already been by to change the locks. Before anyone starts, I checked what I was allowed to do. The house is only in my name, she left Saturday, and I wasn't letting her pop in whenever she felt like it. My phone lit up immediately. Not from Dora, but from Vivian. Vivian's message was exactly what I expected. How dare I throw her sister out like garbage? This was emotional abuse. Dora had every right to communicate her feelings, and I was punishing her for being honest. Did I not understand that healthy relationships require space to process complex emotions? I was going to regret this. Men like me never changed. Dora deserved better. I responded with the storage unit details, in case Dora had missed them, and suggested Vivian help her find a new living situation since she was so concerned about her sister's well-being. Then I muted the conversation. The next few days were a blur of logistics and attempted interventions. Zoe called crying, asking what happened. I explained honestly. She went quiet, then said she'd warned Dora about Tristan years ago. Arthur never called at all, but he texted me 3 words. "I'm sorry, son." That told me whose side he was on. I had to tell my own people too. My parents took it better than expected. My mom said she'd always thought Dora was a little too focused on appearances. I sent a brief email to the 80 people on the guest list saying the wedding was canceled. Didn't go into specifics. Through all of it, Nate and Roscoe provided the only social interaction I needed. "Okay, let me make sure I got this," Roscoe said during dinner at my place Wednesday night. "She asked you to sit tight while she took her backup boyfriend for a test drive? You said heck no, and now she's confused about why she's crashing at her sister's place? That's the short version. And this guy she wants to figure things out with is Tristan, the digital marketing guy. That's him." Roscoe nodded slowly, processing this information with the gravity it deserved. "She left you for a guy who calls himself a brand strategist. I honestly can't tell if that's an insult to you or just proof that nothing makes sense anymore." Then Nate asked, "What about the wedding deposits? You're going to lose some money." I'd already run the numbers. About $8,000 in non-refundable deposits. The venue, the photographer, the caterer's booking fee. Expensive, but not devastating. I'd rather lose $8,000 than spend the next 40 years wondering when my wife was going to ask for another exploration break. "Consider it tuition," I said. "Cheaper than divorce." By the end of the first week, Dora had fully mobilized her support network. Vivian was posting thinly veiled social media content about toxic masculinity and the epidemic of men who can't handle emotionally intelligent women. One post was a selfie of her and Dora captioned, "Protecting my sister from narcissists." She tagged it hashtag survivor not victim. Tristan had apparently stepped up as the devoted new boyfriend, posting pictures of them at brunch with captions about soul connections and finding your person when you least expect it. Dora herself had shifted from denial to anger and was telling everyone who would listen that I'd thrown her out without warning over a simple conversation about feelings. The version of events going around our mutual friend circles was that I'd overreacted to Dora wanting couples counseling, that she'd suggested working on communication, and I'd responded by having her belongings removed while she was at work. The story had nothing to do with what actually happened, but the truth stops mattering when someone's decided they're the victim. Nate kept me updated on the social dynamics since he ran in a lot of the same circles. Most people were staying neutral, waiting to see how things shook out. A few had quietly reached out to express support. The ones who'd spent time around Tristan were less surprised than I expected. "Here's the thing," Nate explained while we sanded the hull. He'd bought this old fishing boat for practically nothing from an estate sale. The previous owner had let it sit in a garage for 15 years, but the bones were solid. Everyone's known Tristan was into Dora for years. We all just assumed she'd never actually go for it because, no offense, the guy's insufferable. The surprise isn't that she developed feelings for him. The surprise is that she torpedoed an engagement to act on them. The boat work was good for me. Physical labor, tangible progress, something to focus on that wasn't the implosion of my future plans. We spent weekends sanding, repainting, replacing hardware, arguing about the right way to restore the wood trim. The kind of project that fills your head with practical problems and leaves no room for the other kind. Roscoe would show up sometimes with sandwiches. "I drove past that coffee shop where Dora and Tristan do their little morning hangouts," he reported one Saturday. He was showing her something on his phone with this smug face. She was nodding along like he was explaining brain surgery. It was honestly hard to watch through the window while I waited for my order. 2 weeks after the breakup, Dora asked to come by and pick up a few items she claimed had been missed during the packing. I agreed, figuring it was easier than arguing about it. What I didn't expect was for her to show up with Tristan as her emotional support. They pulled into my driveway in Tristan's car, some sleek thing with personalized plates announcing his Instagram handle. Dora got out first, looking uncomfortable. Tristan got out second, looking like he was walking into a building he was about to purchase. Head-to-toe athleisure that cost more than most people's work wardrobes. I was on the porch when they approached. Roscoe had actually stopped by earlier and was inside grabbing something from the kitchen, which would become relevant shortly. "Hey man," Tristan said, as if we were old buddies catching up. "Thanks for being chill about this. I know the situation's messy, but we're all grown-ups here, right? No hard feelings." He actually extended his hand for a handshake, like we were closing a business deal instead of him picking up my ex-fiance's belongings from my house. I looked at his hand, then at his face, then at Dora, then back at him. "You're not coming inside my house." Tristan's smug expression flickered. His hand dropped awkwardly. "Come on, bro. I'm just here to help Dora with boxes. It's not that serious. What happens in my house isn't your business. You can wait by the car like a good valet, or you can leave. Pick one." Dora tried to intervene. "Hunter, don't be childish. Tristan's just here to help. He can help himself to a spot on the curb." Tristan puffed up at that. Actually puffed up. "Look, man, I've tried to be cool about this, but you need to chill out." Dora made a choice, and that choice was me. You can either deal with it like a grown-up or keep acting like this and prove exactly why she had to get out. She didn't get out. I threw her out. Big difference. That's when he made his mistake. He stepped forward with his chest puffed out, trying to physically insert himself into the situation. Here's the thing about Tristan. He'd spent years being the nice guy orbiting Dora. In his head, he'd finally won. And now some guy who'd lost was disrespecting him in front of her. So he did what guys like him do when their fantasy meets reality. He escalated. I'd been playing lacrosse since I was 12. I'd spent 4 years getting hit by guys twice Tristan's size. I'd also been working manual labor projects for the better part of a decade, which meant my grip strength alone was probably double his. When he put his hand on my chest to push me back, instinct kicked in. I grabbed his wrist, stepped to the side, and used his own momentum to put him off balance. He went down hard on the porch, more from surprise than any technique on my part. Roscoe had come out onto the porch at some point during the exchange. He stood there holding a glass of iced tea, watching the scene unfold with mild interest. "Well," he said, "that was fast." "Stay down," I told Tristan, keeping a hand on his shoulder. Not pinning him, just making it clear I could if he tried something else. You put your hands on me on my own property. That was stupid. I'm going to let you up. You're going to walk back to your car. You're going to stay there while Dora gets whatever she supposedly needs. Nod if you understand. He nodded, his face red from embarrassment more than exertion. I stepped back and let him get up. He scrambled toward his car, trying to brush off his clothes like the dignity would come back with them. There was a scuff on his designer sneakers now. He didn't look at Dora. Didn't say anything. Just got in the driver's seat and stared straight ahead. Dora stared at me like I'd grown a second head. That was so unnecessary, she said. He touched me first. Get your things. You've got 10 minutes. She was out in 7. Roscoe timed it. She grabbed a yoga mat, a jewelry box, and a framed photo of her and Tristan from some college formal. Not a single photo of us. I don't think he saw any of that coming, Roscoe said after they'd driven away. Some guys just talk themselves into corners and have no idea how to get out. About 3 weeks after the porch incident, I probably should have let things settle. Moved on with my life, focused on the future. But Tristan had been a thorn in my side for years, and the image of him scrambling away from my house didn't quite scratch the itch. Not revenge exactly. More like helping the universe balance things out. The opportunity came through Nate, who'd learned through his extensive network that Tristan was up for a contract with a regional restaurant group. Apparently, they were looking to update their social media presence across several locations, and Tristan had been pitching himself for months. It was the kind of contract he'd been hyping up, posting cryptic updates about big moves coming and major announcements soon. What Nate also knew was that the restaurant group's marketing director, a woman named Christine, was an old college friend of mine. We'd stayed loosely connected over the years, the kind of relationship where we'd grab coffee once a year and catch up on life. I sent her a text asking if she wanted to meet up. Over coffee, Christine actually brought up Tristan first. She was frustrated. He'd been slow to deliver on preliminary work she'd requested. His proposals were heavy on buzzwords and light on specifics, and he kept pushing the timeline while simultaneously posting about how busy he was with other projects. She pulled up his Instagram to show me. 3 posts that week about grinding and building an empire. 0 deliverables to her inbox. She was already leaning toward passing. I mentioned almost as an aside that I knew Tristan through personal circumstances, that he'd recently started dating my ex-fiancée while we were still engaged. I wasn't trying to tank anything, I said. Just figured she should have the full context since we all ran in similar circles, and it might get awkward. Christine nodded. She said character mattered in long-term partnerships. She thanked me for the heads up. I don't know if my conversation was the deciding factor or just confirmation of doubts she already had. Probably the latter. Tristan had been shooting himself in the foot for weeks before I said anything. But 2 weeks later, his social media announced he was taking a break from client work to focus on personal growth. The comments were full of supportive emojis from people who had no idea what was actually happening. The fallout started quickly. His whole lifestyle looked expensive, and once that contract didn't happen, the big successful brand guy routine started slipping fast. He started taking on smaller clients. His posting frequency dropped, and then he started distancing himself from Dora. It happened gradually enough that I only heard about it through the grapevine. Fewer brunch posts, fewer public appearances together, more solo content about self-improvement and finding your own path. The guy who'd been posting about soul connections was now posting about the importance of focusing on yourself first. Dora, who had blown up her engagement for a man who promised emotional connection and creative partnership, was apparently now dealing with a boyfriend who was too busy trying to salvage his career to provide either. Everyone paying attention noticed the irony. Nate delivered the final piece of news about 2 months after the breakup. Tristan moved back to Atlanta, he said. Told Dora he needed to be closer to a bigger market for better opportunities. Said they could try long distance if she wanted. Let me guess, she didn't want. Nope, they're done. I took a sip of my coffee and nodded. The satisfaction was mild but real. Not because Dora was suffering, but because the fantasy she'd chosen over our life together had collapsed under its own weight, exactly like I figured it would. 3 months after Dora moved out, my life had settled into something surprisingly comfortable. Work was going well. The house felt like mine again. I'd sold most of the decorative plates at a yard sale. Roscoe helped. Nate and I had finished the boat restoration and started taking it out on the river most weekends. Something about being on the water at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand. No agenda except seeing what bites. Clears your head. The territory manager position had led to a promotion I hadn't been expecting. Regional coordinator for the Southeast, which meant more responsibility, but also more flexibility. I was traveling some, meeting new people, building a professional network that had nothing to do with the Savannah social scene that had consumed my life during the Dora years. Turns out I'd been running at maybe 60% capacity while constantly managing relationship drama. Without that weight, work felt almost easy. Meanwhile, Dora's situation had gotten worse in ways I only heard about secondhand. I didn't go looking for information, but Savannah's a small town, and people talk. The event coordination job had become complicated once word spread about the circumstances of our breakup. The industry was small enough that people talked, and the version of events that circulated wasn't the one Dora had been selling. Several clients who'd been planning to book through her venue found reasons to explore other options. Her boss, who apparently knew the real story through mutual connections, had started giving her less desirable assignments. Vivian's support had cooled once Tristan disappeared. Having a sister who left her established fiancé for a best friend who then bailed for career opportunities was harder to spin than having a sister who was just following her heart. The social media posts about toxic masculinity stopped. The check-in calls got less frequent. She had her own image to worry about. Dora's parents had taken sides. Her mom still spoke to me occasionally, mostly apologetic messages about how she'd hoped things would work out differently. Her dad had apparently told Dora that she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, and he wasn't sure he could respect her choices anymore. 6 months after the breakup, I got invited to a mutual friend's birthday party. Jamie, who'd been friends with both of us since before we started dating, was turning 35 and throwing a thing at his place near Forsyth Park. I almost didn't go, but Nate convinced me it would be good to show face. The party was exactly what I expected. Maybe 30 people spread across Jamie's house and backyard. Good music. Better food. Casual enough that people were actually enjoying themselves. I posted up near the back porch with Nate and Roscoe, catching up with people I hadn't seen in months, deflecting questions about the breakup with practiced vagueness. I'd been there about 2 hours when I noticed people starting to cluster near the front of the house. The kind of grouping that happens when something interesting is going down. Nate went to check and came back with a grin that told me everything I needed to know. Dora's here, he said, and she's a mess. She'd apparently started drinking hard before she even arrived. Showed up in a car with some friends from work who'd probably hoped the party would cheer her up. Instead, she'd kept going during the drive over, and by the time she walked in, she was already past the point of good decisions. The friends were trying to manage her, but Dora had that determined energy of someone who decided tonight was the night to say everything she'd been holding back. 6 months of watching her reputation crumble, 6 months of watching me apparently doing fine. It had all built up to this. I stayed on the back porch. Roscoe stayed with me. We could hear her voice cutting through the party noise, talking too loudly about how this was such a fun party, and how good it was to see everyone and how she was doing so much better now. The confrontation I'd been hoping to avoid came about 30 minutes later. She appeared on the back porch, flanked by 2 friends who looked like hostage negotiators who'd lost control of the situation. Her makeup was smeared. She was holding a cup of something that was definitely not her first of the evening. Nate and Roscoe both straightened up slightly. "Hunter," she said, dragging out my name like it was an accusation. "There you are. I was wondering if you'd actually have the guts to show up." I looked at her calmly. "Hey, Dora." "Don't hey Dora me." She stepped closer, wobbling slightly. "You wrecked my life. You know that, right? You wrecked everything because you couldn't deal with me being honest about my feelings." The porch had gone quiet. People were watching now, pretending to have conversations. "You wrecked your own life," I said. "I just refused to go down with it." She laughed. "Tristan had you figured out from day one. You were always threatened by him, always jealous of what we had. That's why you couldn't just give me some space to sort things out. Speaking of Tristan, where is he? I didn't see him around." The question hit harder than I expected. Her expression crumpled for a second before she pulled it back into anger. "He had to focus on his career. We're still friends. It's called being adults about a relationship, not that you'd get that." Someone near the back door snorted. The back door. A few others shifted uncomfortably. Dora didn't notice. She was too busy glaring at me. Roscoe muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch, but it made Nate almost spit out his drink. "Dora," I said, keeping my voice level. "You asked me to wait around while you tried things out with another guy. I said no. That's the whole story. Everything after that was because of your choices, not mine. My choices were about being authentic, about honoring what I was actually feeling. You just wanted to control me. I wanted to marry someone who was sure about me. You weren't. So I got out of your way, so you could be with the guy you were sure about. How'd that pan out?" She opened her mouth to respond, but something stopped her. Maybe the faces of the people watching. Maybe the realization that she was having this conversation loudly at a party while barely able to stand. "You think you're so much better than everyone," she finally said, her voice cracking. "You think because you've got your grandmother's house and your boring job and your boring life that you've won something. But you haven't won. You're going to end up alone because you can't handle a woman with real feelings." I stood up from where I'd been leaning against the porch railing. "I'm going to head out," I said to Nate and Roscoe. "Fun evening, though." I walked past Dora toward the side gate that led to the street. She grabbed my arm. I stopped, looked at her hand, then at her face. She let go. Behind me, I heard her friends trying to manage her, heard her voice rising as she realized I was leaving without taking the bait. "Don't walk away from me, Hunter. This isn't over. You owe me an explanation for blowing up everything we had." I stopped at the gate and turned back one last time. "We didn't have anything, Dora. I built a life, and you crashed in it until you decided you deserved better. Turns out better wasn't on the table. That's not my problem." I walked out. Nate texted me afterward. Dora had continued her meltdown for another hour after I left. Apparently, she'd cornered Jamie to complain about how unfair it was that he'd invited both of us. Jamie had told her he'd invited 30 people and wasn't going to plan his guest list around her relationship drama, which hadn't gone over well. Then she'd gotten into some kind of argument with another guest. The details were fuzzy, but it escalated until someone asked her to leave. Her friends managed to get her outside, but not before she'd gotten sick in Jamie's front yard. The story made the rounds through our social circles over the next few days. Dora, who'd spent months trying to control what people thought about our breakup, had given everyone a way more memorable story to tell instead. The last I heard, she was looking at jobs in Charleston. New city, new people. I wished her well. I hoped she found whatever she was looking for. As for Tristan, I heard he'd pivoted to some crypto thing. Blockchain consulting or whatever. One of those rebrands that sounds impressive until you realize it just means the last thing didn't work out. The boat Nate and I restored sold for a nice profit, and we started on a second one. Roscoe got promoted at his job and used the excuse to throw a small party at my place. New faces started appearing in my social circles. People who'd never known Dora, who had no stake in the old drama, who just showed up. Some nights I'd sit on that porch and think about everything that had gone down. And somehow, despite all of it, I'd ended up with a better life than the one I'd been fighting to keep. Honestly, the best revenge is really just living well. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.